Welcome to the Species Canine Podcast. I'm Jared, your host. Today, we are going to discuss positive punishment and escape conditioning, the importance of which in dog training and how they work and why they work. And we'll discuss some interesting studies that were done to prove this fact. Stay tuned. So welcome to the podcast. If you are new, welcome to the pack. If you are a continued listener and supporter, greatly appreciate that. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so we can get this information out to more people so we can all learn and train smart. So first thing, we need a quick definition. What is positive punishment? Positive punishment is simply anything that changes the stimulus that was caused by behavior. So dog in the down command, they break the down, they get a e-collar correction. That was a change in the stimulus. It's adding something that's typically an aversive that is unpleasant to the dog. Now, there's a range of aversives, a simple, very low star mark finger pump is an aversive, and punching your dog in the head is an aversive. Don't do that. Never do that. So it's just simply a change in the stimulus. That's all it is. It's just adding something that's an aversive that's typically used to prevent a behavior from happening. Now, more importantly, escape conditioning. This is the act of teaching the animal, whether it's a rat, pigeon, dog, cat, doesn't matter, how to make this thing stop. Okay. If I don't want to get speeding tickets, I just don't speed. Pretty simple, right? If I don't want to get shocked, I don't lick the light socket. Just pretty simple, right? So your dog doesn't understand what a star mark collar means until you teach them that. They don't understand what an e-collar means until you teach them that. And these two studies we're going to discuss here really reinforce this information and why it's important to teach escape conditioning. So let's go ahead and jump into the first study. Okay. The first study was a study entitled "The Performance Change Escape Conditioning Follow a Shift in Magnitude of Reinforcement." This has been done by a gentleman named Woods back in the year 1967, long before I was born. So this study examined how rats escaped behavior changed when the size of the reinforcement was suddenly increased or decreased during training. The reinforcements consisted of escape from cold water to warmer water with a large temperature increase representing the larger reward. On a little side note here, when you read the study in depth, at no point in time were the rats fully submerged underwater. They were carefully and deliberately lowered into the water, so their head never went above it. If you don't know, rats are actually excellent swimmers. The purpose of this, the researcher wanted to determine whether the change in reinforcement magnitude would produce, one, a gradual adjustment to the new reward level, a positive contrast, also known as elation effect, after an increase in reward, or a negative contrast, depression effect, after a decrease in the reward. The rats get sad, essentially. The method, they used 64 rats were trained in the water escape tank. 2 reinforcement levels were used. A high reinforcement, the water temperature increased by 16 degrees Celsius. You can do the math if you want to know what that is in Fahrenheit. Low reinforcement temperature increased by only 2 degrees Celsius. After 60 training trials, some rats were switched from a low to high reinforcement, while the others were switched from a high to low. Control group remained at the same reinforcement levels throughout the study. Key findings. The increased reinforcement, so high to low, going from colder water to warmer water, the rats gradually increased their performance after receiving the larger reward. Their performance eventually matched that of the rats already receiving the higher reward. However, they did not exceed the control group's performance. Therefore, there was no elation effect. The decreased reinforcement, high to low, the performance declined after the reward reduction. Their performance dropped below that of the rats already receiving a low reward. This temporary drop below the expected level was significant depression effect. Performance eventually recovered to the level appropriate to the lower reward. So what happened to change in behaviors? When reinforcements increased, swimming speed increased. Competing behaviors such as hesitation and distractions decreased. When the reinforcement decreased, swimming speeds decreased. Competing behaviors increased substantially. They actually noted there. These competing behaviors were responsible for much of the temporary performance decline. So in essence, the rats knew that no matter how fast I swim, it doesn't matter. It's not going to get any warmer or any faster. So if I want to go see what happens on this side of the tank, I'm going to go over there. Were the ones that knew, hey, the faster I get to the side of the tank, the warmer the water is going to get. Let me get there fast. That's essentially what this is saying here. So the overall conclusion on this was the animals adjusted gradually when the reinforcement magnitude changed. Reward increase improved performance, but did not create a temporary performance boost beyond the normal expectation. So it was a natural increase in the behavior. It was a natural decrease. It didn't spike. So it was gradual over time. And we're going to discuss why that's important. Rewards decreased produced a temporary frustration-like effect at the lower performance. This supports the idea that reduction in reinforcements may create frustration, leading to more variable and less effective behavior, essentially unpredictable behavior. So the big takeaways here, the study suggests that reducing reinforcements can have a strong behavioral impact than increasing it. When rewards are reduced, performance may temporarily worsen beyond what would normally be expected. Therefore, increasing rewards tends to produce a gradual improvement without an extra surge in performance. This finding has implications on learning, motivation, behavioral modification, and animal training, as we're discussing here today. So here we find that even though they were getting a bigger reward, the behavior didn't spike. It was a gradual increase. So the animal learned by escaping the unpleasantness and getting to the end faster, even no matter how big the reward was, it was still a gradual increase because it was learning. And it wasn't getting overly excited because it didn't know if it was always going to be there, right? So it had a gradual increase in that and the change in the behavior. So why is that important for dog training? When we apply this type of situation to dog training, we have to understand that the behavior is not going to happen immediately overnight. It's a gradual increase. This time, it takes time for the dog to learn. But the important thing here is to understand the consistency, that the reward was consistent over and over and over and over again after the escape conditioning. So the rats learned that it's always going to continue to increase. Now, what they're finding here in the study, when they went from a really high reward, getting to that warmer water, and the water didn't get warm as fast, they kind of got a depression sense and a sense of frustration where the rat's behavior actually decreased. So if you're using a high value reward for your dogs and they're getting a correction and they're escaping it, and you're seeing a side effect that they're just basically giving up or kind of getting frustrated, it's probably because they're not getting that reward fast enough, whatever it may be, to continue the behavior. So you're going to see more of a behavioral change when the reward is reduced versus giving a bigger reward. So your dog fixes himself on e-collar correction, say for the place command, and you throw them a T-bone steak. Well, it's going to be a gradual increase in the behavior versus they've been getting a T-bone steak every time, and all of a sudden that stops. You're going to see a bigger change in the behavior because of that lack of reinforcement, because of that frustration and almost like depression effect, as they called it in this study. So this is a very interesting way of looking at positive punishment and looking at that escape behavior because they did it with water, which is very interesting there. So on to the next study. So the next study is the effects of escape conditioning and shock intensity on responding during inescapable shocks. This study was done back in 1969. So the purpose of this study, the researchers wanted to determine whether prior escape training affected how animals behaved when later exposure to inescapable shocks was happening, how shock intensity influenced the response during inescapable shocks. The authors were investigating what they called superstitious escape behavior. Now, if you listen to some of the podcasts, you've heard me talk about the superstitious pigeon, and that's what they were kind of going off of. The superstitious pigeons, quick summary on that, were inside a box. Skinner set up a reward schedule that I think it was like every 15 seconds or something like that. It just dropped a food pellet to the pigeon, and the pigeons started picking up on what they were doing and essentially started doing superstitious behaviors. One would spin in a circle, one would bob its head, all thinking that's what was causing the food pellet to fall. No matter what the food pellet was going to fall, the pigeon could have went to sleep, it was still going to be falling. But they created this superstitious behavior. So they're kind of building on that with positive punishment. So the officers were investigating what they called superstitious escape behavior that continued even when it no longer controlled the outcome because the animal mistakenly associated the behavior with shock termination. So method of the study, they used 12 rats were used. 8 were first trained to press a lever to escape a shock. 4 rats received no escape training and served as the control group. So this might sound a little familiar. B.F. Skinner's box, he had the Skinner box with the dogs that knew how to escape the box, they knew how to jump out, and you had the other group that didn't know how, and that's where learned helplessness comes in. For the trained rats during the escape sessions, pressing the lever would turn off the shock. During no escape sessions, the shock ended automatically after 3 seconds, regardless of what the rats did. Lever pressing had no effect. So regardless, 3 seconds of continuous shock, whether they pressed the lever or not, didn't matter. Intensity of the shocks was from 50 to 250 volts. The effort required to escape is a fixed ratio schedule ranging from FR1 to FR5 for some rats. So the key findings here. Escape-trained rats continue to press during inescapable shocks. Rats with a history of escaping the shocks continue to press the lever even when it no longer stopped the shock. This supports the idea that the behavior was superstitious escape responding. The rat had learned that pressing often coincided with the shock ending and continued doing it despite the lack of actual control. So animal learned, I press this lever, it makes it stop. The shock's happening. I'm pressing. I'm going to keep pressing this thing, hopefully making this thing stop. Okay. Regardless, it was going to stop after 3 seconds, but the rat continued to press. Rats without escape conditioning training rarely responded. The control rat had never learned to escape the shock, press the lever, showing little change in response as the shock intensity increased. This suggests the increased response was not simply a result of a stronger shock caused by more random activities. More difficult escape training increased superstitious responses. Some rats were required to make a progressively more response to escape the shock, FR1 to FR5. Comparing to the normal escape rates, these rats showed greater response during the later inescapable shock period, an increased tendency to continue to respond despite the behavior no longer working. So in this particular part of the study, the rats had to either press the lever once, twice, 3 times, 4 times, 5 times to make it stop. And teaching them to do that and then adding it where they could not make it stop no matter what, they would still continue to go through that cycle of trying to press it to make the behavior stop, regardless of the intensity of the shock happening, even though it was not working. The conclusion on this, a history of successful escape behavior strongly influenced later behavior during uncontrolled aversive events. Responding during inescapable shocks is best understood as a superstitious escape behavior maintained by accidental reinforcement when a response happened to occur near the end of the shock. Higher shock intensity produces more of this responding, just as a high shock intensity typically produces stronger escape behavior. So the higher the shock, the faster these rats were hitting these levers and trying to make it stop, right? So big takeaway here in the behavioral terms here, the study demonstrates how behavior can persist even when there is no longer control outcome if there is a strong reinforcement history. The finding provides an early experimental example of suspicious behavior maintained by accidental reinforcement, particularly in the escape and avoidance situations. So a lot to digest here. This is actually a really big study. Pursuing my master's in applied behavioral analysis, it was a tough read even for me. So one of the things we want to take away here, is teaching the animal, teaching your dog how to escape an adversive, how to do escape conditioning is very important in teaching them how to make the adversive stop. Otherwise, you get what we have in this control group where they just stopped. They stopped trying. They didn't even try to do anything to make it stop because they didn't know how. They didn't know this little lever can make it stop, right? 2, we have to ensure that we're not reinforcing the wrong behavior. So we saw that here where the animals that were pressing the lever frantically, right, even though it wasn't going to stop, just happened to be hitting the lever at the end of the 3 seconds. And that's what made it stop. So it was reinforcing that behavior of continuing to hit the lever to make it stop, even though it was going to stop anyway. Okay. And that's where the superstitious escape behavior comes in. So ensuring that you go through a very slow, deliberate process of teaching your dog how to escape a correction is, and not necessarily reinforcing the wrong behavior. So you teaching a place command, and you want to teach the dog how to escape, say, an e-collar, and the correction is too slow. The dog gets off the place, turns around, gets back on the place when they get the correction. You can inadvertently teach the dog that that's how they make it stop. They get off the place, they turn around, and his versus just going straight right back down. They get off and they turn around. And that's essentially what was happening here, is that these rats were just guessing because they took what was already learned and tried to apply it to a new environment that they didn't understand. So we have to be very clear and deliberate when teaching escape conditioning to our dogs, that they understand correct behavior to make this behavior stop. And this is why going really slow and using really low intensities so the dog isn't freaking out and panicking, you can go through this process of teaching. And that's essentially you got here, where these rats were panicking and just going back to a default behavior that they had learned and just press this lever as many times as they could, right? And so in combining both of these studies here, when the dog does return to the behavior and it's fixed, or reinforcing that, and they're going to understand why this is happening and how to make it stop. And then in doing so, I get a nice reinforcer. So the likelihood of them fixing themselves faster is greater now because of that reinforcing effect. Always going back to our first phase training, reinforcing the behaviors we want, discouraging the behaviors we don't want. If you give a dog a correction and we don't give them a good boy or some type of affection, some treats, well, they don't know if they did right or wrong. And you see what you get here with the rats in the tanks swimming from cold water to hot water, hot water to cold water. They get that frustration level, almost like a depression level, and their behaviors actually get worse. And a lot of trainers' response to that is just higher level corrections, and that's not going to fix anything at all. And so going back and reading these studies that were done long, since 1967, 1969, and taking that information and applying it today is very valuable. And I've never heard of either of these people who wrote these studies until today, until I was doing the research for these things and earlier this morning and going through that. Luckily, I have access to ASU's library, which is a massive research university, so I get a lot of access to things. And I was able to pull these studies and read through them and kind of summarize them for you all here today. So hopefully this gives you some insight onto why punishment works in the appropriate circumstances when you use escape conditioning correctly, and simply go into a compulsionary system of slapping an e-collar on a dog and telling a dog sit and nicking them until they sit does not work. So that's exactly what happened in both of these studies, primarily the electric shock one, where the control group that didn't understand how to escape didn't even try. They didn't even try. Infrequently was the word they used to hit the lever to make it stop. So essentially that lever is sit or down or come or place, whatever it may be. So you have to teach your dog the escape conditioning component. Very, very important. So thank you so much. Please drop me a comment below on what you think of positive punishment and escape conditioning. I know it's a controversial subject. A lot of people don't like positive punishment because I think they lack the knowledge and insight on how it can be done ethically and humanely. And going through this process of escape conditioning and teaching is the most important part of it. And we can be Lima, according to Stephen Lindsay, who coined the term Lima, says that e-collar is a very appropriate thing to use when addressing behaviors. But again, we always do go back to that positive reinforcement, reinforcing the behaviors, because as we see in the studies, that is the pivotal point. That's where we have to reinforce the behaviors we want, and you get a better outcome over it. It takes time, as they proved. It was a slower increase in the behavior, but it got there. So again, please drop a comment, like, share, subscribe. Let me know what you think below, and greatly appreciate y'all's support. And we will continue to put out content for you because I enjoy it, and I hope you all learning something right along with me. Until next time, train smart.